Great. Thanks, Catherine. So again, welcome to the launch of the National Integrity Index public bodies study, with a particular emphasis this time around on semi-states and universities. I'm John Devitt, Chief Executive of Transparency International Ireland, and I'm joined by Catherine Lawlor, Advocacy and Research Coordinator at TI Ireland. Before I hand it over to Catherine, I should take care of some housekeeping. This webinar is recorded. You're invited to raise your hand and ask a question, post comments in the chat or a question in the Q&A. The recording will then be made available on YouTube for those of you who want to watch back. So without further ado, I should just briefly introduce you to TI Ireland. TI Ireland, founded in 2004, is part of an international network of autonomous NGOs campaigning for measures aimed at tackling corruption, both domestically and worldwide. Probably best known for the Corruption Perceptions Index, which ranks countries according to the relative level of perceived corruption in those countries, with Ireland sitting in 20th position out of 180. And we do a great deal more than just measure perceptions of corruption. We undertake research in a number of areas, including whistleblowing, lobbying regulation, anti-corruption measures. We operate a helpline, free-phone helpline for people speaking up about wrongdoing, and also work alongside a law centre which can provide free legal advice to people who refer to it. And in 2016, we launched Integrity at Work, which is an initiative aimed at creating safer working environments for people to speak up, and are working alongside 30 or so participating organisations in that initiative. We're funded, for those of you who are interested, by public donations, by philanthropic support, and government support as well for our helpline. And this particular study is funded by the Community Foundation for Ireland. With that out of the way, I'll hand you over to Catherine, and please, as I said, feel free to post any comments in the chat or questions in the Q&A. Catherine.
Very much. I'm going to start to share my screen. So that's okay, is it, John? You've seen that? Great. So I'll just give a brief overview first of the National Integrity Index project and where this particular report sits with. So it's a multi-year series of studies examining how well prepared various sectors are to face corruption-related risks by examining the transparency around anti-corruption measures and transparency more generally. So from left to right here, there are the three previously published reports. The first one was on local authorities in 2018, and that was updated in 2019, which you can see in the centre there. Sorry,
Catherine, just your sound isn't great. Is there anything, do you have a microphone there, or is it?
Just the built-in one. There's interference, is there?
There's a little bit of feedback on the thing. I'm not sure there's anything you can do. We'll soldier on anyway. If,
okay, sorry about that.
But I'll mute myself now.
Okay. So yeah, the two first reports there, 2018 and 2019, are on local authorities, and the third one is a report on private sector companies in Ireland, which was published in May this year. As John said, the overall project is being supported by the Community Foundation for Ireland, for which we're very grateful, but of course the research and any views expressed are our own. All of the reports in the series are based on a methodology developed by TI chapters and used worldwide in similar studies on various sectors since 2008. The way it's structured is that it examines organizations against a set of indicators, assessing their disclosure of policies and reporting. And in each of our reports so far, including the one we're launching today, there have been 30 indicators. I should stress that it's not an assessment either of compliance with existing regulations and guidelines or of actual levels of corruption. So when we talk about scores, it's not at all to suggest that there is corruption or equally that there isn't. The study doesn't aim to assess that, which would be a very different sort of study and approach. The aim is to encourage good practices in transparency and governance, and to recommend safeguards in policy and transparency against corruption. The aim is to update the findings of the various studies periodically. So as I said, there was previously an update to the Local Authorities Index. On the left here, you can see the results from 2018, and on the right, 2019. So the darker the colour, as you can see along the end there, on the bottom of the slide, that represented a lower score. So you can see there's a vast improvement across the board in between the 2 years. So the same set of indicators were revisited in 2019. You can see here on the next slide just an example of the improvements that were made. So we'll say, for instance, Wexford County Council going from a score of 7 up to 19, which meant moving from 30th out of the local authorities to 5th. And you can see similar improvements there for Galway and Galway County Council and Kilkenny as well. So that's just to show the improvements that we would hope to see when we revisit the other studies to update the private sector one, and of course the public sector we're just launching today, but hope to update next year. So to give a bit of background to this particular study, we've 30 organisations that have been assessed, a list of which I'll show you shortly. They were selected from the Central Statistics Office Register of Public Sector Bodies. We've assessed them against 30 indicators in these 5 areas. So that's anti-corruption and anti-bribery programmes, which examines whether they've made public an anti-corruption and anti-bribery programmes or details of measures that would fall within that. Their financial transparency, so reporting on their financial statements, but also procurement, charitable donations, and so on. Open governance, that category looked at how transparent the organisations were about their structure and structures, decision-making processes, membership of boards, and so on. Responsible political engagement looked at corporate political engagement policies, lobbying where relevant, and policies in place to handle revolving door hiring. The last category then was whistleblowing policies. For each indicator, each of the 30, there was a score of 1, 0.5 or 0 available. And then just below there on the slide, we've outlined how we collected this data and when. So it was mainly collected, the public data was collected in July, shared with the organisations in September for any feedback or commentary. And then we incorporated that commentary where it came, because not all of the organisations did engage. We incorporated that in October, November, and are obviously publishing the report today. So to move on to the results, we have here a summary of the overall scores and in the various categories. So you can see here the average overall score was 43 with a maximum of 77 and a minimum of 22. I've outlined here the scores for the various categories. As you can see, open governance was the category in which the organisations performed best, ranging down then to responsible political engagement, where scores were the weakest. I'll show now an overall ranking. So you can see here on these 2 slides, we've outlined all the organisations. So you can see here on top, 77% was Ervia, with ESB closely following at 72. You can see here we've a mixture in this study of what we might call semi-state organisations and also universities. So that's because this particular study was based initially, as I said, on the CSO Register of Public Bodies and on specifically what they class as commercial entities. So we have here, you'll recognise obviously some of the state-owned companies, The universities have been included due to their significance to the economy, their revenues in terms of fees and research as well. So you can see universities performing very well there in the top 5, Trinity, NUIG and DCU. And then we go through each category, starting with anti-corruption programs. There was a relatively poor average score here, but it was the widest spread as well. So despite that relatively poor average score, you can see a couple of organisations here performing extremely well, or beyond 100% because they had published a comprehensive anti-corruption programme, including details of training and monitoring, and compliance is required by all employees, directors, and so on. Throughout, though, the lower average score was the fact that there was generally relatively little specific information about anti-corruption controls. So often there was information on financial controls, but not addressing corruption or fraud even specifically, and little information on broader anti-corruption measures, for instance, training, monitoring, and due diligence. Here on the right, I've just included the top 10 ranked, more or less, as you can see, ranging from 44 up to 100 there. The next category was financial transparency. On some primary elements, performance was good here. So 29 of the 30 organisations had disclosed their financial statements for the previous year, but detail on other aspects like budgetary detail, procurement figures, details on those were less common. Very few of the organisations among the 30 to which FOI legislation, Freedom of Information legislation, applies were meeting the Model Publication Scheme guidelines of publishing details of their payment orders and contracts above a certain threshold on a quarterly basis. And information on charitable donations as well was relatively rare and almost never presented in a clear tabular form. On the right here again, obviously there are more than 10 organisations, but those are the ones within the top 10 ranking places, we'll say. The next ranked would have been below 10. So top performers here you can see are Greyhound Racing Ireland and Horse Racing Ireland, very close, 57 and 58. And they performed better than others because they were among the only ones to release budgetary information as well as their financial statements for previous years. The next category is open governance, which had the strongest performance by all organisations. You can see here on the right, the top performing organisations are all on 100 here. I think the lowest score in this category was 70. So generally there was good transparency around board composition, the structure of organisations, their subsidiaries, joint ventures, and so on, and the nature of the relationship to the state, whether it be it a state-owned enterprise or how the universities relate to the state and their funding, or a statutory organisation as well. There's some room for improvement in terms of the accessibility of this information. So while it was available, often it was spread around different sections of websites or in various different reports. So we would recommend a dedicated corporate governance page that would collect all of this information, and could also be a space in which broader compliance documents and anti-corruption documents are made available. The poorest scoring category, as I mentioned, was political engagement. Often there was, excuse me, there was rarely information on lobbying published on organisations' own website where that's relevant to them. There were also very few detailed policies on revolving door hiring, where there were mentions of this perhaps in codes of conduct or contracts, which some organisations shared with us. It was mainly, as said here, clauses on confidentiality of the organisation as opposed to addressing elements of revolving door hiring as such. Again, on the right here, I've given a spread of the top organisations, but as you can see, that ranges from 70 at the top down to 20 was sufficient to be ranked 8th here. The last category is whistleblowing policies. This is the second highest scoring, but where, for instance, the where the average score for open governance, which was the best scoring category, is 90%. The average score in whistleblowing policies was 47, so it's a drop from the best category to the second best category. Nonetheless, there were strong performances here in terms of actually having a whistleblowing policy, unlike, for instance, in the anti-corruption program section, where often there was no program disclosed. However, sometimes the whistleblowing policy formed part of a code of conduct, as opposed to being a standalone document in its own right. In certain cases, the protections for whistleblowers were connected to a report having been made in good faith, which is not in line with the Protected Disclosures Act 2014. The Protected Disclosures Act states that a person's motivation in making a disclosure is irrelevant in terms of whether or not they enjoy the protections of the Act. So we would recommend that phrasing be removed. It has been interpreted in case law elsewhere as referring to motivation. So it would be best that it not feature in whistleblowing policies. There's also a requirement under the Public Disclosures Act to publish an annual report on public disclosures by the 30th of June each year. Only 19 of the organisations had done that. So that's something to look at. There was also a lack of detail on external reporting channels and on training for employees handling disclosures. But over on the right here, again, it's the organisations that came within the top bracket. And you can see the scores are generally strong, so 63 up to 88 for Dublin Port and CIE. Just to give an overview here of a comparison with the private sector report. On the left, you can see the results from the public sector rather, and on the right, the private sector. The categories you'll notice are slightly different. So in the private sector, we had a category called organisational transparency, which included indicators that in this report are found under financial transparency and open governance. But if we look at the overall scores to begin there, you can see the maximum in the private sector was 68, whereas it's 77 here. So although the average is lower for the public sector than the private sector, the better performers performed better in the public sector than the private sector. Interestingly, perhaps the anti-corruption programs category is weaker in the public sector than in the private sector. The private sector, much more broadly, more frequently, the companies that we examined there had a standalone anti-corruption program that they had published online, which was very rare among the public sector. However, organizational transparency was very poor in the private sector, which included their structures, their subsidiaries, and so on, whereas the equivalent in the public sector, open governance, was very strong. So there's sort of an inversion there. Political engagement was the weakest category in both reports, although we can see that the maximum score in the public sector is higher than it was in the private sector. In whistleblowing policies, there's a comparable performance. The next one compares with the local authorities. The report on the local authorities did include similar indicators, but the way that they were modelled for the local authority report, given the difference in sectors there, you can see the category names are slightly different. But looking again at overall scores, you can see that there's a similar average and similar maximum score. But these figures for local authorities are actually the ones from the revisited, updated report in 2019. So these figures for local authorities are after they had made improvements to their transparency. So the fact that the public sector bodies that we've examined are already performing at the level represented by these overall scores is encouraging. So hopefully when we have the chance to revisit, we'll see even stronger scores again. I wanted then to show so the recommendations that we've come to in the report. So these first four are across all categories. So it's to publish governance documents and make them easily accessible to the public online. So that would be in reference to, for instance, having a dedicated corporate governance or ethics page that collects relevant policies together and makes the information not just available, but readily available. Secondly, to make disclosure policies meaningful through monitoring and reporting on performance. So not just to have the policies there as an academic exercise, but to show that they're actively implemented and updated as risks evolve. Third, to set the tone from the top with an unambiguous high-level commitment against corruption and bribery. So again, there were, as I said, a lack of dedicated anti-corruption programs, and often we found in the private sector report that that was where a commitment like this would sit. So for instance, a statement by a CEO or chair committing to a zero tolerance policy on corruption. And number 4, to equip employees with the training and resources to implement anti-corruption measures. That again could be something outlined in an anti-corruption program, and shows that measures are taken to make sure that a policy is reflected in reality and in behaviours of employees. The next page of recommendations are more specific to the categories. So number 5, to publish a comprehensive, proactive, risk-based anti-corruption and anti-bribery program. As I've mentioned a couple of times now, those programs were relatively rare. And can be structured in such a way, as we say, to be risk-based, so to be appropriate to the scale and activities of an organisation. Number 6, to provide clear information on asset disposal and procurement procedures and disclose details of contracts awarded. These sorts of documents were quite rarely available. 7, to commit to a policy on responsible political engagement and greater transparency in lobbying. There were very few policies on political engagement and especially addressing in regards to lobbying revolving door policies. And number 8, to adopt a standalone whistleblowing policy that does not include a good faith requirement. So I've already gone over the good faith aspect, and to have a standalone whistleblowing policy given the complexity of the applicable legislation, something that addresses that more thoroughly. Excuse me. So we have some good practice examples on our website. So I'm just going to stop sharing this PowerPoint so that I can share the website instead. Bear with me one moment. So this where the report and data has been published on our website. We've links to this good practice. So as I said at the outset, the aim is to highlight and promote good practices. So here we have, in connection with the 30 indicators, an example largely drawn from among the 30 organisations that we've surveyed of where organisations were performing well. So I won't go through all 30, it would take maybe quite a while, but maybe just to highlight some examples. For instance, the ESB and ERVIA were 2 organisations that had published dedicated anti-corruption programmes, and so many of the examples in this anti-corruption section refer to those. So for instance, the ESB had announced a zero tolerance policy in relation to bribery, corruption and other wrongdoing. VHI, here in connection with AC2, had within their annual report a dedicated director's report referencing bribery and corruption and stating their commitment against it, and that was signed by the chairperson and director, which again was among the 30 organisations probably the strongest example of that high-level commitment against corruption and bribery. So again, I won't go through all of these. I just wanted to highlight maybe those 2. In financial transparency, as I mentioned, Greyhound Racing Ireland was one of very few organisations that had published quite a bit of detail on their budget for the coming year, and not simply the financial statements for a previous year. The examples of charitable donations and community contributions were very well laid out by ERVIA's subsidiaries under the model publication scheme of FOI. In open governance, all organisations performed very strongly. So we just have some specific examples here of the different indicators and examples. Political engagement. There was a good example from DAA of Dublin Airport had a list of the interest groups in which it is involved very clearly and prominently on their website, which was quite rare among organisations. So we were looking to see where organisations disclose themselves their membership of interest groups, as opposed to the interest group itself perhaps having a list of organisation members on its website. Dublin Airport had disclosed directly which organisations they're involved with. And then the final category, whistleblowing policies, for instance, on the matter of external channels available to workers. It was rare enough that there would be contact details provided to facilitate employees in making disclosures externally, whereas RTE had included details of an external independent company that they have that they engage with to provide this service. And Dublin Port was, I think, the only company to have information of how they train the staff who deal with handling protected disclosures. So that gives, they had that built into their whistleblowing policy, which gives reassurance to whistleblowers or people considering making a report that the people that they engage with have been appropriately trained to exercise the provisions of the legislation to protect them in making that disclosure. So this is all available on our website, transparency.ie, along with the report, the data that's been gathered on each of the 30 organisations, and some further details about the methodology. So that's all been published this morning, and we can provide a link to that maybe in the chat. So that is the end of the presentation. Sorry, I'll just stop sharing this screen, and we can open to any questions, or if John, you want to make any comment on any of that before we move on.
No, nothing to add really. Thanks for that, Catherine. I think what's worth noting that the goal of this, I mean, underlining that the goal of this exercise is to promote the adoption and disclosure of policies aimed at preventing wrongdoing, in particular, with a particular emphasis on corruption-related wrongdoing. And if our previous studies are anything to go by, we would expect to see an improvement in the performance of public bodies. We hope, as you noted, Catherine, that we to publish the follow-up study to this on other public bodies early in the new year, in the first quarter of 2022, with a follow-up on this particular study on semi-states and universities in the third quarter, so in the autumn or late summer of 2022 as well. I don't think we have any questions so far. We'll leave it in a minute or so, but should we just also thank those organizations that provided us with feedback on the findings. I'm aware that it can feel a little intrusive to have a third party, an organization, scrutinizing your policies and procedures and disclosure practices. But as I said, the aim is solely to improve adoption and disclosure, not to name and shame organizations for failing to adopt policies. And we hope that they will also see the value of this project in improving existing policies and procedures too. There wasn't anything for you to add there, Catherine?
No, just to echo the thanks to organisations that engaged with us really productively. And I know there were some that have already undertaken to publish policies that weren't previously published and change elements. So that's very encouraging and welcome. And so we look forward to updating next year to reflect those changes.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from Lauren Kierans, who says it's interesting to see that the findings of the private and public bodies regarding whistleblowing policies are comparable. Could this mean that the statutory obligations under the 2014 Act on public bodies regarding procedures are somewhat futile without there being accountability provisions also? I'm trying to understand the second part of that question, or the question itself. I think yes. Oh yes. If I get if I think if I understand your question correctly, Lauren, Catherine, I'm not sure we have an observation on this, but currently the law compels public bodies to adopt procedures, whistleblowing procedures or procedures aimed at fulfilling their obligations under the 2014 the Protected Disclosures Act. But there are no penalties for failure to comply. And I just noticed they followed up there with the same observation in the question, Lauren. There ought to be and there ought to also be a requirement on them not just to publish these reports, but to share them with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform and the forthcoming Protected Disclosures Office, which will be established under the 2021 Amendment Act or 2022 Amendment Act when it is eventually passed. This amendment is aimed at transposing the EU directive on whistleblowing, and will create a new authority for assessment and investigation of disclosures in the public service. Our view is that new office should be able to report on compliance with the Act and make observations on its implementation, and also receive and publish information from public bodies which are required to have these procedures in place. To repeat myself, every public body has an obligation to publish its report on the number of disclosures received and the action taken in response to them at the end of June every year. And as we can say there, you see there's a mixed compliance with this provision. It's notable that a significant number of private sector bodies, companies have these policies and procedures in place. Not all of them, in fact. Catherine, you can remind me, I don't think too many were publishing reports on the number of disclosures received, in large part because they don't have an obligation to do so right now. But many of our financial services companies and companies with a presence or headquartered in the US will have had these policies and procedures in place for about 20 years now. An obligation was created under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002, I think, for companies listed in the US or a significant presence there to have policies and procedures aimed at facilitating whistleblowing. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of penalties would apply, what examples been set elsewhere for public bodies in respect of disclosure and requirements to disclose or publish reports. But it's something that should be considered as part of the amendment of the Protected Disclosures Act. Thanks, Lauren, and I'm sorry for the long-winded, meandering answer, but I hope it answered the question. Catherine, you didn't have any observations yourself?
Not necessarily, but maybe as a clarification more so, that we'll say the lack of compliance with the publication date, for instance. I got the sense in the course of doing the research that this wasn't for any out of any desire not to comply, so much as maybe a lack of clarity about how to comply. So there was confusion over interpretation of the date, the year to which it refers. Is it the previous calendar year? Is it the year to 30th of June? Is it the financial year if it's different? And then the use of the term annual report, several organisations made the point that they can't publish their general annual report until it passes various stages with the Oireachtas, and we're under the impression that the Protected Disclosures annual report forms an inherent part of their annual report as such, and that they therefore couldn't publish it, couldn't comply with that before the 30th of June, whereas it's a standalone piece that happens to use the name annual report. So there is perhaps a lack of clarity, despite the fact that the Act is in since 2014 on how to comply. And sometimes these, and I know this is just one aspect, we'll say, of compliance with the legislation, but sometimes the reports were published later, so we're partially compliant.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that we might want to bring to DEPR's attention. DEPR, the department responsible for oversight and implementation of that legislation. I think one of the observations I would make is that many of the organizations wouldn't necessarily see the need for enhanced risk mitigation measures aimed at tackling corruption. And there may be an opportunity here for the Department of Justice to provide more guidance to public bodies and companies on compliance with the 2018 Criminal Justice Corruption Offences Act, which created a new set of obligations on organisations to have procedures in place that would mitigate the risk of corruption, and also created new offences such as trading in influence, which organisations both in the public and private sector should be aware of. And I said, the aim of this is to encourage organisations in the public, of this entire exercise is to encourage bodies in both the public and private sector to go beyond the letter of the law and to meet international standards in addressing the risk of wrongdoing or malpractice inside their organisations. I don't see any further questions. Catherine, did you have anything else to add? I won't take up any more of your morning, so thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks again to the Community Foundation for Ireland for their generous support for this project. We hope to host another webinar on 9th of December this year to mark Anti-Corruption Day, with a particular emphasis on money in politics, and look forward to welcoming you back again in 2022 for the launch of our next public bodies report. So thanks again. The report, by the way, is on our website at www.transparency.ie. This video will be made available on YouTube, and we'll share the slides with anyone who wants them. If we have your email address already, we'll send them out. Alternatively, just drop us a line at info@transparency.ie and we'll send them on to you. So thanks again. Thanks, Catherine. And we'll see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.